Welcome. Welcome to the second Terra Madre Forum organized by Indigenous peoples and with Indigenous peoples as protagonists. My name is Luis Francisco Prieto, and within the Slow Food movement, my role is to be the focal point for Indigenous peoples, communities, and Afro-descendant network. In Terra Madre event, Indigenous peoples have a specific agenda, and this forum is part of that agenda. So as we explained in our last forum, Indigenous peoples' presence within the Terra Madre program is vast. So if you're interested in it, please go to the terramadre.com, terramadresalonedelgusto.com, and search by tagging Indigenous Terra Madre, and you will see how many activities organized by Indigenous leaders are being held in this 6 months of Terra Madre event. So these conversations are organized jointly and supported by our key partners such as IFAD, which is the International Fund for Agricultural Development, Tamalpais Trust, and the Christensen Fund, who have been supporting us and the Indigenous peoples movement within slow food for at least the last decade. I see some of our IFAD friends connected, linked with us today in the chat. So welcome and greetings to you too. Last time we talked about Indigenous peoples' resilience to COVID and our other threats. Today we are going to talk about forest peoples and another threat, which is land grabbing. In fact, even though Indigenous peoples have always protected biodiversity, today several communities are being evicted from their lands with the conservation excuse. I don't know if you ever heard about that. So we will try to raise awareness on this issue, but also as we are positive, we will try to show positive examples of how Indigenous peoples actually protect biodiversity, protect the forest, and protect our world and our life. So let me thank you all for being with us today, and let me thank all the Indigenous leaders who are with us today as panelists, who will be sharing their time, knowledge, and wisdom with all of us. I hope internet will be with us for the whole session. And we are a grassroots organization, so these things can happen. Let me now introduce and give the floor to the moderator of today's session, which is Winnie Sengwer from the Sengwer Indigenous people in Kenya. And I'll introduce her with a short video that she prepared for us.
Good morning, good evening, Slow Food members. My name is Sengwer Winnie, a member of the Sengwer Honey Slow Food community. I come from the Sengwer Indigenous community in Kenya that are hunter-gatherers. This means that our way of life is in the forest. We are conservationists, and our way of life is conservation. We live in the forest. We understand what the forest needs. One thing that makes us stand out is that we have been fighting for our ancestral rights, that is, our life in the forest, since the Kenyan government evicted us, and there has been frequent evictions. So I'm here to talk about why Indigenous people are the best people to conserve the forest.
The floor to you, Winnie. I'll deactivate my video. Let's have a nice and beautiful session all together. I'm back again, since I see that Winnie is having some troubles with internet. I don't know if, Winnie, can you hear us? Let's wait for a little bit, otherwise I'll be giving the floor to Milka Chepkwar. Oh, Winnie, you're here. Thank you.
Sorry, as Francisco, you had earlier indicated, we are grassroots organizations and this might happen. So sorry about the hitch. Thank you for the introduction. So as I take the floor, I would like to appreciate everyone that is here today, the forest people that are present, the hunter-gatherers that are present here in this webinar. So today's title is Forest People's Food System Facing Land Grabbing in the Debate for Conservation. So looking at this topic, what came into my mind is myself as an Indigenous person, and what do I understand by this? So the goal of this webinar is first to raise awareness on the consequences that the conservationist approach of forest causes on the Indigenous life in harmony with the nature and protecting it, with the examples that will come from, we have representatives from Kenya, we have representatives from America, and representatives from Asia. So one thing that came into my mind is maybe we should understand, what do we understand by Indigenous people? So I got a brief description of who an Indigenous person is, and this talks of all Indigenous people everywhere in the world. And Indigenous people are the inheritors and practitioners of unique cultures and ways of life relating to the environment. Like, and these people, their culture, their way of life, their language is distinct from other dominant communities. So that is my understanding of Indigenous people. The Indigenous people have social, cultural, and economic and political characteristics that are distinct from the dominant communities that they live in. We find that when we talk of Indigenous people, hunter-gatherers come into our mind, fisherfolk come into our mind, pastoralists come into our mind. So these are people that are different from other people, and their way of life is very different. Even their languages are different from other people. So when now we come to the topic of land grabbing, what are the Indigenous people facing in regards to land grabbing. Yeah. So what do we understand by land grabbing? Land grabbing first directly affects indigenous people, their human rights. Like when you evict people from their lands, when you take away land from people, first you're taking away their right to land, and that is their human right that is guaranteed on the international human rights law, including their right to food, their a clean, healthy environment, their right to a sustainable environment. So when you take away their land, when you grab these people's land, you have denied them these rights that they are entitled to. So land grabbing displaces indigenous people and it destroys the environment, because during this land grabbing and during these evictions, people's homes are burnt, people lose lives, a lot of things happen in this process. So we destroy the environment. And number one, we should understand that indigenous people, their way of life is conservation. They understand what the environment needs because they are the custodians of the traditional knowledge. So when you have the traditional knowledge, you understand what the environment needs, right? So by grabbing the lands and territories, we lose the great contribution that the indigenous people bring in, that by designing and implementing solutions. For instance, climate change. When you evict people, when now homes are being burnt and trees are being cut down, these are some of the things that lead to the effects of climate change. We find there are prolonged droughts, we find there are floods in places where there shouldn't be floods. We find that so many things happen that would not have happened if indigenous peoples had been left in their lands. So also by grabbing these people's land, you make them lose their identity. You make them lose their culture. You make them lose so many things, because when you grab my land and you evict me, that forces me to move to another place. This place is not my home. This place is not my ancestral home. My way of life is not in this other place, but this place that you have displaced me from. So I will lose my culture. I will lose my language. I will be forced to be assimilated to these other people that I will go live with. So for years, the indigenous peoples have been facing violent human rights, a lot of human rights violations. I know Milka will come in with examples of what has been happening to the Sengwer indigenous community, the human rights violations that has been happening to human rights defenders in the community. Clare will also give us examples from the Ogiek community. Those are some of the human rights violations that come in as a result of grabbing these people's land and evicting them from their ancestral homes. Also, I had talked about traditional knowledge, and I said traditional knowledge. Our indigenous people are the custodians of this traditional knowledge, and when land is owned and managed in a traditional way, uh, it considers nature and sacred and acknowledges humanity as part of it. So it also encompasses practical ways to ensure that there's a balance in the environment in which these indigenous people live in. Yeah, so that when there is a relationship between them and the environment, and by these people using the knowledge that they have to take care of the environment, they are in a position to get very clean water that we own, and this is indigenous food that we always talk of, clean air, when clean and fair food, and all these can only be found if indigenous people are allowed to use their traditional knowledge in taking care of the environment. I'll stop there for now, and I wish to invite Milka from Kenya. She will introduce herself and probably give us examples of what is happening to the Sengwer indigenous community in Kenya. Welcome, Milka.
Thank you so much, Winnie. So much of what I would introduce myself with in regards to my community is what Winnie has said before, because we come from the same community. So just maybe to reiterate that we are from the Sengwer indigenous community, a hunter-gatherer community living in Kapuas Forest and in Embobut Forest in the western parts of Kenya on Chirangani Hills. And just to give us a background of where actually land grabbing started for the case of forest indigenous communities, and maybe where the food system was, the distortion of the food systems of indigenous communities started, especially for our case, and maybe this applies to the case of the Ogiek of Mau and Mount Elgon and other forest indigenous communities. Is that during the colonial times, the British colonial government displaced indigenous communities from their plain lands into the forest and took those lands for white islands because they were very productive lands for whatever the crops that they were growing. And my community specifically was just pushed into the forest. And we continued staying in the forest because there was no big deal anyway. That was our way of life, and this is our way of life. So living inside the forest, and then the forest ending up being gazetted, and all of us being inside the forest, there was no recognition and appreciation that we were part of the forest. And so the forest was just regarded as a place that should be protected, and no one should be in. But in reality, the Sengwer are inside the forest. So this then comes, the country's independence, and the independent government takes over, goes ahead with the same foundation that was laid by the British government, that for conservation to happen, no one should be in the forest. And therefore evictions started then, long time ago. And over the years, the evictions have been increasing. But at some point, I think in the 90s, in the late 90s, is when now the food systems of the Sengwer indigenous community was distorted. And in the 80s as well, because the first president of the Republic of Kenya introduced another agricultural way of life that was not for the Sengwer. So the sheep was introduced in the forest. Cows were introduced in the forest. Potatoes and pyrethrum growing was started in the forest. And so that was meant to be kind of a glamorous thing that would then attract more of the community members and the neighboring communities to take up. And in that way, the very hunter-gatherer economical livelihood for the Sengwer started fading away. And so these days you tell someone that we are the Sengwer community and live inside the forest, and people wonder which kind of economic systems we live. And they cannot imagine that we can hunt, we can gather fruits and survive, because then the whole country is depending on food crops, to survive. And it's clear then that when land is taken for another reason that is not an indigenous way of life, and made to look like a modern thing in the way that conservation is done today, that is practically land grabbing. Why I'm saying that is because people would imagine that land grabbing is just when a situation where land is taken for development, or land is taken and someone is paid off later in terms of compensation when the land is already taken. But no, for the case of indigenous people, the lands have been grabbed for using different agricultural and economic activities, converting lands to protected forests, converting lands to wildlife reserves. Even when indigenous people still lived with their wildlife in those lands for years, nothing actually happened. So I think the way in which conservation is being taken in the current world is actually the land grabbing itself. And communities here in Kenya have been coming together to give demands, especially to the strong bodies in this world. Recently was to the CBD regarding the target, the framework to have 50% of the world to convert to protected land by 2050 or 2030. And to us, that is just an acceleration of the land grabbing for indigenous people. Because the more we want to convert these lands to protected places, the more we are kind of telling governments to kick people out, to convert indigenous people's territories to conservation reserves and areas. And of course, definitely this is something that is going to take people out of their natural environment and therefore distorting their food systems, therefore distorting a lot of other things. And then this is where the governments or the development partners come in to say, you have to change your way of life, you have to do something that is more productive, you have to do something that gives you money. But as we all know, money is the source of all evil. No one will not want to take a little portion of land somewhere else and destroy the forest to make more money than conserving a larger part of that world, not just for ourselves as indigenous communities, but for the whole world. And I also think that there are many other ways that the conservation organizations and governments are using in land grabbing. And discussions have been going on, especially from indigenous communities and their views on processes like REDD+, for example, where parties, countries will be paid for protection of their forest and the conservation of their trees. And to me, this looks like, I'm not sure really, but looking at situations where communities haven't acquired their formal ownership of their lands, then this is just another form. This could be a possible form of land grabbing. And I'm just hoping that many community members and across the world can be able to successfully get entitlement to their ancestral territories, because then that is the best way to make sure that when any other interventions comes through, then they are the first entry points to whatever governments or conservation agencies will want to do in their territories. I think that's all that I would want to say for now, and pass it back to you, Winnie. Thank you.
Thank you, Milka, for taking us through what the Sengwer indigenous people are going through and that history of where land grabbing began. We appreciate that. And I think as human rights defenders, we will not stop fighting for what is rightfully ours, right? So as indigenous people and as human rights defenders at the forefront protecting land rights and other rights of indigenous people, we will continue talking about these injustices and some of the things that are happening to indigenous people. Thank you for that, Milka. And I would go next to Clare. I hope you're ready with a presentation from the Ogiek indigenous people and take us through what is happening in the Mau. Thank you. Welcome, Clare.
Hello, I am Clare Orono from the Ogiek community, Ogiek and Presidium, which is based in East Mau Forest, Nakuru County, Kenya. I am an indigenous community, and we usually eat meat from the forest. Also, we eat honey from the forest. Honey and meat is the staple food of the Ogiek community. Thank you so much.
Thank you for the introduction. Now, Claire, you can take over. And unmute kindly, Claire. You're muted.
Okay, the Ogiek community were originally from the forest. The forest, they depend on forest resources mostly. They were hunters and gatherers, such as Sengwer community. Also, they hunt animals, such as antelopes. They hunt hyrax, which mostly found in trees. Also, antelope, we use antelope skin for honey bag. We create from the skins and we carry honey from it. Also clothes, traditional clothes, we normally wear the skin of the antelopes and the hyrax. Also they gather fruits. Mostly when you go to the forest, you find most fruits, bitter, also it's herbs, also the honey from the forest. Honey is the staple food for the Ogiek community. They used to give children on their young age. They used to, instead of milk, they give honey. Many people, elderly, children, and the young age, they eat honey as their staple food. Also, we have herbs, which we gather from the forest. Herbs, we use it to treat many diseases, because the Ogiek community, they didn't know about any medicine, any hospital, though they have introduced nowadays, but in their ancient times, they used medicine from the forest, which is herbs, for both children and adults. They mix honey, meat, and stinging nettle, and eat as food. I say that the Ogiek community, they conserve forest so much. You found them, they go to the forest to fetch firewood, which is a dry firewood. You could not find any indigenous people cutting fresh trees or even destroying any tree, but they use firewood as dry trees. So without forest means no honey, no meat, no herbs, and we are not Ogiek community. About the land grabbing, as the indigenous community, we don't have any say, because I call it big fishes, because there were many companies which is timber companies, such as Tim Cells Limited, initially was called East African Timber Company, cooperative society, not company. It was a cooperative society. They harvest the old forest, especially the cedar, which is very important to the community of the Ogiek. They use timber to create hives. Also timber for everything considering honey, we use timber. So they come, they cut it, and they started to plant exotic trees, which is harmful to even the environment. Also, it's harmful for the bees because they don't have any flowers. Such exotic trees are like pine, cypress, and eucalyptus. And you find pine and cypress, they have a certain chemical that it can even kill the bees. And you find that any part in the forest that you find a cypress, a pine, you'll not find any bees. So it was not a good deed. Also, exotic trees were not suitable food for the bees. And you find bees, they go far away to look for their nectar. And you find that it affects the season of harvesting our honey, because maybe the drought time, it's prolonged. Instead of going to the next area to look for flowers and nectar, you find they are going far away. About the eviction, I'm saying it's all about the indigenous community. We are facing a lot of eviction. As Ogiek community, this year on June, I remember very well, it was 8th of June. The Ogiek community were evicted from their ancestral land. It was very painful by the government. The Kenya Forest Service, they came and evict the community, saying that they want to come and restore the Mau issue by planting trees. And you know that the Ogiek community, there were no any original land, but they were found in the forest, which is now a Mau forest. Also, the government promised that to resettle the community, but by now they haven't. So the community are facing a lot of challenges, and that brings the issue of others moving to other communities, others moving to towns, and they end up losing their original homelands. And we lose when they go to other parts of the country, they adapt with the other people and they forgot about their culture, about their honey. So I think that was not good for us. And I'm saying that by now, we don't know about our tomorrow as Ogiek community. It's not known and not guaranteed. Winnie, I think I don't have more. Thank you so much.
Thank you so much, Claire. And I think one issue that you have highlighted that has caught my attention is the fact that when exotic trees are planted, we get bees moving away and now changing the harvesting season of honey. And as we all know, hunter-gatherer communities depend on honey for medicinal value, for their socioeconomic well-being. And I think as we continue advocating for our land rights, we will continue planting more indigenous trees because they ensure that we have enough honey in our forest and that we are assured of our socioeconomic well-being, medicinal value, and even boosting now the slow food presidiums that we have. So thank you, Claire, for that. And I think we would watch Imanhul's video and then get him taking us through presentation and his story from Indonesia. Thank you, Claire. Welcome, Imanhul.
Desa Nangalao dihuni oleh komunitas Melayu di Kapuas Hulu. Telah mendapatkan hak pengelolaan hutan desa seluas 1.430 hektar berdasarkan keputusan Menteri LHK nomor 685 pada tanggal 23 Februari 2017. Pengelolaan hutan desa secara lestari bertumpu kepada 3 pilar. Pilar pertama adalah peningkatan kapasitas sumber daya manusia. Pilar kedua adalah melakukan perlindungan kawasan hutan. Dan pilar ketiga adalah memanfaatkan hasil hutan bukan kayu. Pengelolaan hutan desa Nangalao telah mengacu pada standar yang ditentukan oleh Yayasan Plan People sebagai jaminan kelestarian hutan. Hutan desa Nangalao mampu mereduksi sekitar 1.512,4 ton CO2 per tahun. Atas prestasi inilah, masyarakat Nangalao mendapatkan dukungan pendanaan pengelolaan hutan selama 25 tahun melalui program SCCM. Harapan di masa depan adalah hutan terjaga, sumber kehidupan tersedia, masyarakat sejahtera.
Thank you, Winnie. Hi, my name is Imanhul Huda. I represent the Kapuas Hulu Slow Food Community, Indonesia. This is in West Kalimantan province. I will share a story about the village forest management by the community in Nangalao village, Kapuas Hulu, Indonesia. Okay. As people who live in and around the forest, we realize that the benefit a lot of from the forests. It support our life. We will protect and preserve that our children and grandchildren benefit from it in the same way. So this Kapuas Hulu Slow Food community consists of two ethnic groups, Dayak and Melayu. We have some vision or the aim of the member of the community is clear: to support and preserve local food biodiversity in harmony with the traditional culture and the inhabitants, respecting their dignity, prioritizing social justice, and protecting the forest ecosystem of Kapuas Hulu. Sorry. Okay. The Phyllis Forest, the Phyllis Forest of Nangalao. This is they have the Phyllis Forest area about 1,430. This is like 18% of the total village area. They already received recognition from the state and granted the right to manage for 35 years by the Ministry of Environment and Forestry in 2017. The ecosystem of the forest is pit swamp. This forest be habitat for a variety of flora and fauna, such as orangutan, Bornean langur, sunbear, various type of fish and bird, etc. This forest produces the natural honey about 10 until 15 tons per year. Inhabited by 706 people and 197 families of ethnic Malay. The village forest managed by the community directly through the village forest managed unit we call LPHD or LPHD. They obligate to make long-term plan 10 year and short-term 1 year. Village forest management is certified through an international standard. It's Plan People beginning 2018. 25 years of long-term financial support through the Sustainable Community Conservation Mechanism to support the implementation what they already planned in long-term plan. The mechanism to payment, they use performance-based payment. Based on the long-term payment, our partner give support the financial for the implementation in the field. The LPH, they obligate to make an annual report also, and this activity in the village forest supporting the reduction of the emission about 1,500 ton CO2 equivalent. This is the registration of certificate from the Plan People. And many so the biodiversity in this area and some species, the status is critical endangered, like the Bornean langur. This is we call the Presbytis chrysomelas in botanical name, in and also Tomistoma or Boya sunyulong, Tomistoma scaliguli. Also the Bornean orangutan, Pongo pygmeus. The population is very low and very threat. So, sorry. Oh, yes.
1 minute.
Yeah. Yeah. What we do to forest rehabilitation and protection, the community will do the regular patrol every month in Phyllis Forest and every 3 months in forest limited production. Also, they have the group to control the fire. They have do livelihood development with some commodities like the honey, fish, rubber, rattan, and ecotourism. What the threat now is any timber company come to their village to work with the logging. This is can be threat for the some habitat for the orangutan, for neon langur, and some other wildlife in the village. So the last message from us is protecting the forest means protecting our food and biodiversity for the sustainability of our common generation. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Imanhul, for the presentation. And the fact that you guys can produce 10 to 15 tons of honey in a year is good, yeah, as it helps also, as we had spoken about socioeconomic empowerment, selling the honey, using it in medicinal values. I think that is good. Thank you for the presentation. And we have one last presentation from Murilo from Brazil. I don't know if you're here.
Winnie, I think he's trying to connect, but
Okay.
he's having still some connectivity issues.
Okay, then as we wait for him, I have a question from we have a question from the attendees, and this goes to all panelists. The question is, how does the slow food honey communities project help to resist land grabbing? And maybe Claire, you could tell us with the Ogiek Honey Presidium, what do you do and how has the project helped to reduce issues of evictions from the government? Yeah, Claire?
I think the Ogiek Honey Presidium, when we introduced, even the government knows because we are some project from the government. We will work with the communities. So it's like they actually in the conservation planting of trees so that
Claire, I think we lost you. Francisco, can you hear Claire?
She's there. She's now unmuted. Claire, would you mind switching on your microphone and switching off perhaps the video?
Claire, you're muted. Okay. Maybe Milka, you could tell us something about the Sengwer.
Yeah, thank you. Yeah, this movement having just started recently. Of course, this is something that has been happening within the community because that is how we live. But now having taken it ahead to join other communities across the world in the movement is a step that we thought would be important. But we would say that it doesn't like help. It is not a first-hand and immediate help to land grabbing, but it's a way to change the government's thinking towards our economical way of life. Because for them, of course, our demands as Indigenous people at the Sengwer community is to live in our land, in our ancestral territories, because that is us, and we are that land. So with that, there have been discussions about how well we will be able to conserve the forest, especially from government officials that think that everybody does food crops, that includes digging down the ground and clearing more forest to do more. To us, then, this movement is just to show them that no, we can produce in our traditional way of life, produce more honey that enhances more forest cover, because we want to feed the bees to be able to feed us. And that is our way of life that has never been put on books. So they don't really understand it until we come to a point where we can practically show them that our honey production is what we want to depend on. And in as much as in the previous years we were not producing honey for sale, then we will produce it for sale. And there's no way we will produce honey as an Indigenous community without protecting the forest, you know? And this then is just a first step to try and make them understand. And hopefully this will stop the evictions, because then we will be allowed to do our honey production and get our income as a community. And that way evictions may not happen. An unnecessary evil also is that evictions cannot happen when we have a lot of bees in the forest. The bees will fight people, and you will just have to leave people in their natural environment than going for them and being fought by the bees. So kind of the bees are our soldiers, our security. Yeah.
Thank you, Milka. Maybe we could hear from Imanhul. And I see Murillo is here.
Yeah, this is a different situation in Indonesia because the government have regulation with the social forestry to support for the community can access management rights. So in here, the first time the community can identify what the potential in their forest. After that, they can make documentation and make the map, and after that they can send a proposal to government to can choose some scheme in the social forestry. To this is the to find the management right. This is cannot do people from the other area there that the forest exists. Just the for villager that the forest exists. So like the Nangalao, they have the potential with the honey. So the honey can conserve the trees, can give the food for the wildlife in there, can also for the community in there. The trees in the forest can contribution for the emission reduction also. From this activity, they can promotion what they already do in with the forest conservation. After that, now they find some partner to support their in the long-term financial alternative. Yeah.
Thank you, Imanhul.
Yeah.
Murilo, we welcome you to the webinar. Sorry for having trouble with your internet. You can take the floor now.
Sim, posso sim. Ah, bien. Deixa eu fechar aqui. Olá, bom dia a todos. Meu nome é Murilo Juruna, moro aqui na aldeia Boa Vista. Gostaria de cumprimentar todo mundo. Pedir desculpa também, né? Teve uns problemas aqui na comunicação, na rede, no computador, não consegui entrar, mas estou aqui já.
Olá pessoal, boa tarde. Meu nome é Murilo Juruna, moro aqui na aldeia Boa Vista. Sou também sou membro da comunidade Slow Food. Gostaria de agradecer a todos por participando do Slow Food. E para mim é uma honra estar hoje. Beleza? Para vocês. Um abraço.
Então, pessoal, essas imagens aí foi o último trabalho que eu fiz mais ao Mauri, a Marinade, né? A gente fez a cesta agrícola, só de produtos da nossa roça. Foi um período que a gente passou aqui na nossa aldeia de pandemia, né? E a gente usou esses produtos para a gente criar a nossa cesta só de produtos limpos, né? O Amauri teve essa ideia de projeto e a gente pegou todos os nossos produtos da roça, né? Como a mandioca, a macaxeira, o milho, a abóbora, e a gente montou essa cesta.
Thank you, Murilo. Maybe I could ask you a question like other panelists. Now that you are in the slow food community, how does the projects that you do in your community help to prevent land grabbing?
Oi, sim, sim. Tô ouvindo. Então, em relação a isso, a gente tem que mostrar a nossa força, né? Eles têm que respeitar nós e a gente, assim, tá? A gente mostra o nosso trabalho diante de tudo isso, diante dessas empresas, diante dessa pandemia, e a gente está, assim, graças a Deus, crescendo cada vez mais, tendo respeito e reconhecimento. E a gente agradece também as pessoas que apoiam a gente e dão continuidade ao nosso trabalho, e valorizam e reconhecem o que a gente faz de verdade, né?
Thank you, Murilo. So another question to all the panelists, maybe just 1 minute across. And this goes to all of us. We could just take 1 minute to answer. And how are you as human rights defenders in your grassroots communities facing the new threats of agro industry, and what are you doing to prevent it? Yeah. So I don't know where to start from. Maybe we could start with Imanhul, going to Milka, Clare, and then Murilo. Like the question is, how are you facing the new threats of agro industry over your lands, and how are you working to prevent it?
Okay, thank you, Winnie. In our community, priority to find the legal aspect. So we think how the first time what we'll do, how to find the management right, and that the government can protect this area for the community activity. Not so up with this position, the investor cannot go to our forest direct before they talk with the community. So with this, this is the good situation for us in Indonesia. The government already care with the community that they are already live and manage the forest for their lives. Thank you.
Yeah, I think I was next. For us, the Sengwer, of course, having been facing evictions for quite a while, it's hard to protect our lands by ourselves, especially from communities, other majority communities around the forest. And so over the years, there've been encroachment and the pressure, of course, to introduce the crop agricultural way of life into the forest, and also the overstalking done in the forest. And what we are doing to try and overcome that is fight for the recognition, the legal recognition of our land rights through court cases, and through also pleading with international organizations, especially those that support the government in the so-called conservation measures, to let them understand that for us, it's the protection of our land that we want come first, because we do not trust that our land will be safe from being converted to other agricultural reasons, especially when it is in the hands of the government. And I know this is not an easy walk in the park, and we are hopeful that one day our ancestral land rights will be recognized, and we will have a community land title for our forests, just like the law is stated very clearly in Kenya in the Constitution and the Community Land Act. And that then we will
Milka,
not allow agricultural pressure activities to come in. Thank you. Sorry, Winnie.
Okay, sorry to cut you short, but guys, we are out of time. Thank you so much, everyone, for taking your time to attend the webinar. I know we're out of time. Not everyone did not get an opportunity to respond to the questions. Yeah, so next time. But I hand over to Francisco because we are closing now.
Thank you very much. Winnie, for this beautiful moderation. I received a lot of WhatsApp messages regarding your moderation, so thank you very much. Thank you for all panelists that made us travel through forest from Asia till the Americas, crossing Africa. Thank you very much, Milka, also for your beautiful words and introduction. And I am happy, Murillo, that you did it. At the end, you were with us. So at least we have a little bit of Brazil, Juruna, indigenous people. So thank you very much to all of you. We are closing now, and we will see you in December 12th for the next Terra Madre Forum organized by the Indigenous Peoples Network at the global level. We will be talking about the Afro-descendant in the Americas, the protection of traditions and food biodiversity along centuries. You know, Afro-descendants are also struggling and have struggled for the last 300 years at most, protecting their food traditions in somehow another continent. So thank you very much. Please stay tuned, stay with us, and visit the terramadresaronadelgusto.com website with more information on what Indigenous Peoples Network and the Slow Food Movement is doing worldwide to protect our biodiversity. So thank you once again.
The future of our planet is decided at the table, in our daily food choices. What do we know about what we eat? How do we choose? Where do we buy it? You can make a difference and contribute to a future where everyone has access to food that is good. Eating must be a pleasure for everyone. We all have a right to food that is healthy, natural, fresh, and seasonal. Clean. Being aware helps us to choose food that is good for our health and the health of our planet. Fair. Knowing our food means making choices that are fair to us, to the producers, and to future generations. Slow Food has been working for over 30 years to defend biodiversity and fight the climate crisis by promoting good, clean, and fair food for all. Support Slow Food. Let's act together for the common good. Go to donate.slowfood.com/en.